Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for your grace and for your love for us and for your willingness to speak to us through your word. Lord, I am asking today for an outpouring of your Holy Spirit. Let me not trust any talents that I may have, but rather trust the presence of your Holy Spirit. Speak to us, all of us who are in this Bible study today, and help us to really open our hearts and minds to the promptings of the Holy Spirit, so that you would speak to us, because we believe that spiritual things are spiritually discerned. Guide us and direct us according to your divine will, as our prayer in Jesus' most holy name. Amen. All right, so let's get going. We will go to the screen and use that as the means for our progress today. I think we have about 15 members on our Zoom, and then we have about 6 or 7 persons on YouTube. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A within the Zoom application. We won't have a poll today. I'm really happy with the sort of enthusiasm, a little bit delayed, but the enthusiasm that came with the poll last week. And so that people stayed back asking which one they got right and wrong and that kind of thing. And maybe we do a poll again next week. All right, so today we want to just do one question I wanted to respond to from last week, and then we get into today's session. All right, so let's get going. Today we are looking at another, what I like to call our interlude sessions. So we've had 3 so far, although 3 sessions, but 2 topics. In the first case, we looked at the Bible, and we talk a little bit about the prophecies and stuff, and the importance of the Bible, having faith in the Bible. And then we talked about the ancient sanctuary services and the fact that they were representative of God. We talked about good over evil and the cosmic controversy in the beginning, where we talked about the origin of sin. And we said that while the Bible takes it for granted in Genesis and the Pentateuch, that there is a God and there is Lucifer. Later on in Isaiah and Ezekiel, we learned a lot more about Lucifer. And then when we got to Revelation, we got a very clear summary narrative, if you will, in Revelation chapter 12 that used very vivid and very accurate language, very literal language, that spoke about the war in heaven and the fact that the dragon was cast out. And we talked a lot about the timing of when he's cast out, and I told you we'll continue to look at that as we go forward. And then we got to the second interlude, which really focused on the sanctuary services. We spent 2 topics on that. I thought it was well received. People came back with feedback that they understood. And I hope you did your own reading as well, just to get into that. And today, it's our last of the interludes before we dive right back into Daniel chapter 7. And it's really just looking at a brief history of the church and its interrelationship with the Roman Empire in particular. Now, I want to hit you an early disclaimer. This is a lot to cover in an hour. And I really going to make a big effort, but just remember that you need to do your supplemental reading. We live in an age of a lot of easy information, and there is a lot of stuff on the internet that you can access through various data sources. There are a lot of books you can buy on Amazon that are e-books, if you will, and you can read about the history independent of some of the church books, just to make sure there's reconciliation to some of the things that we believe. And I have done that as well. And as a distillation of all of that, I will try to put together some timelines today that are very, very general in nature, but I will try to identify some of the important things that I think are important for us as church members. All right? So that is our focus today. We look at a brief history of the church and the major timelines after Christ. And I suppose I just want to add to that it is in the context of the Roman Empire. Of course, maybe this week, more than any others, we have witnessed the protests in the United States and all the other dramas around the world. Today is a good day to remember that God has a plan. And I think it's important to remember as well that notwithstanding all the strife and the drama that we have seen in 2020 so far, 2020 in just what is now 6 months look like almost as if it was 10 years that have just passed, right? Like 2019 seems so far away. But I want you to remember that when we studied Daniel at the beginning, he and his friends were led away into captivity, but they remained faithful to God. And that is my message to you today, that God has a plan. And even though we may feel as if there's a knee on our neck, if I can quote Al Sharpton, even though we may feel as if sometimes there's a knee on our neck, I want you to know that while there may be a knee on our neck, there's a God in heaven. It's important that we remember that he is always in charge, and he is the one we put our faith in, because one day he will grant us victory. Again, as we move forward, if Sister Kimlin is on board, and I'm not sure if she is, but those of you who know her, you can tell her that I'm answering her question from last week. And she can always go back on the YouTube and check it, or she can always email me directly. But I'm trying to answer one of the questions we got last week. So I'll just go over this slide very quickly. This is our sanctuary service slide that we used last week, right? So we said that while the sanctuary services were happening every day within the camp of Israel, and that will go on and on and on. Every day they will offer animals and blood sacrifices, etc. And the priest will go in. Some days he will sprinkle the blood of the animal inside the holy place in a veil, and then some days he will eat. Sometimes he will eat the meat of the sacrifice and carry the sins of the person himself. And he did this every day. And then in one day of the year, which was called the Day of Atonement, which occurred in October, the Jews will have a day of reckoning where they would want to clear the camp of sin. So that's my quick summary. But when we went through that day, we said, and this is the sequence depicted here, that the Jews will be asked, and this was directly instructed by God in the book of Leviticus. Moses got these instructions. And Leviticus chapter 16 is the one that captures significantly the work of the priests on the Day of Atonement. So on that day, they would pick two goats. They were supposed to be very similar in nature, although this drawing shows them in different colors, but just to distinguish what was the Lord's versus the scapegoat. But they'll pick two goats. One was designated as the Lord's goat, and one was designated as a scapegoat. And I told you he had a Jewish name called Azazel. But really, in fact, it just meant a scapegoat, which really meant something that took the blame for somebody else. We use it in today's parlance, and we say, you're trying to make me a scapegoat, which means that you want me to take the blame for you. So they made a scapegoat. This is where the origin of that terminology came from. And what will happen is that the priest will first make an offering for himself to make sure he was pure. And he would go into the most holy place, and he would sprinkle the blood upon the Ark of the Covenant between the golden cherubs. And within the Ark of the Covenant was, among other things, the law of the commandments. So even though the commandments require a death for sin, by sprinkling the blood, he was signifying that one day the blood of Jesus will come and give us grace and give us a freedom from the penalty of sin. And then he would come back out after he had made a sacrifice himself, which meant that the priest was now perfect as a mediator between God and the people. He would now come back out, and he would take his hands and lay it upon what is termed the Lord's goat, the one they have designated as the Lord's goat. And then once he had laid his hands upon the Lord's goat, he would then transfer symbolically the sins of the nation of Israel that has been in the sanctuary for the entire year onto this goat. He goes within, he kills the goat, he captures the blood, and he carries the blood into the most holy place. So he makes a second sojourn into the most holy place that day, and he offers the blood of the sacrifice again upon the altar. This time it is not for him, because he has already purified himself an hour or few time before. I don't know what the time frame was. But now he is offering the sins of the nation, the entire camp of Israel that day. And once he has done that, basically he assumes that they have been forgiven. And the next thing that happens in the service that was prescribed in the Bible, in Leviticus, was that he will come outside and he will lay his hands on the scapegoat, and that he will transfer the sins of the nation onto this goat. And then some strong men in Israel will take the goat and carry it way out into the wilderness for it to die. All right? And one of the things I said to you, as I concluded last week, is that these two goats are representative of images or of persons within our scripture and our salvation. It's very easy to accept that the Lord, the one that is called the Lord's goat, is representing Jesus Christ. John 1:29 tells us that when Jesus approached John the Baptist for baptism at the Jordan River at his start of his earthly ministry, John says, "Behold the Lamb of God, which take away the sins of the world." We also know that when Jesus died on the cross of Calvary, the veil in the temple was torn from top to bottom, signifying that the ultimate sacrifice has been paid, and therefore there was no need for lamb and goats going forward. I then went on to say to you that the scapegoat, in our understanding, represents the devil, because the sins of the world will be transferred to him. In other words, he is the one responsible for our sins, and eventually he will be destroyed. Well, this is an important little point I just made, that a lot of times is seen as very, very simple, but this is a profound point that is made, because in a lot of years, people thought that the scapegoat was also Jesus Christ. But the more we have studied, the more we realize that the scapegoat could not be Jesus Christ, because he is not paying a sacrifice. He's just carrying his sins and then he dies. But the real sacrifice comes from the Lord's goat, right? Pastor, I'm seeing your hand up. Is it that you have a question? Allowing you to talk? Pastor?
Yeah, unmute. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, I'm hearing you now.
Right. The SDA Bible commentary states that the both goats were identical. They were unblemished.
Yes.
How they were differentiated is that the scapegoat had a scarlet cord around the horn, yes, one of the horn, and the goat that represented Jesus Christ had the scarlet cord around the neck.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, but it was identical goats, unblemished, yes, but the cords differentiated the scapegoat from the Lord's goat.
Great. Thanks for that.
No problem.
All right. So and I'm happy you gave that clarification, because it's important to know that both goats look the same. Like I told you, this drawing deliberately uses two different colors, but that is not consistent with what we just heard from Pastor. Now, because of that unblemished representation, I think over the years, some early biblical authors, and some even today, talk about the fact that we believe that the scapegoat is Jesus. We do not. We accept that the roles are representing two different phases of our salvation, and that the Lord's goat represents what Jesus did upon for us on the cross of Calvary, and that the scapegoat represents what will happen to Lucifer. So when I said that, the question came in as to whether there was a scriptural reference to the scapegoat being Lucifer. So I'm going to be very frank and honest and say that there is no clear scripture that says the scapegoat is Lucifer. What I can say to the person who asked the question last week, and I'm really hoping she's online today, but even if she's not, I'll ask that we convey that to her, is that when we read Revelation 20, verses 1 to 5 in particular, maybe a little bit more, it speaks about at the end of the, just before, when Christ comes and just before the world is destroyed, it speaks about the fact that Lucifer is bound in a bottomless pit for a period of about 1,000 years. And then after that, the earth is destroyed. So that is, I give a very high-level summary there. When we get to Revelation, we will talk about that in detail if you guys stay with us throughout the length and breadth of this Bible study, because it is not a short Bible study, it is a long Bible study, deliberately, because these are substantive issues. So because of the way that is described, it is very, very similar to what happens here with the scapegoat. And it is in that the nexus is made to suggest, and we believe that the scapegoat, that object lesson that was given in the sanctuary service, represented what will happen to our Savior, who will die for our sins, and what will happen to our accuser, who is the Lucifer, who was the originator of sin, what will happen to him, and how he will eventually be destroyed. So that is the nexus. So I will ask that as for homework, we spend some time studying Revelation 21-5, and that will give some good direction. And as you read it, you can't help but see the similarities between what is eventually the fate of the dragon, Satan, which is the term that John uses in Revelation 21-5. So there's no ambiguity over who is being destroyed and who is being locked in a bottomless pit for 1,000 years. And there's a very clear similarity and a nexus between that and the fate of this scapegoat. And by fate, I mean F-A-T-E. So I'm hoping that clears it up a little bit for the sister. And I'm being very, very honest to say to you that there is no scriptural reference that when you read it, you could quote it and say, well, this means that the scapegoat. I just quoted John 1:29 for the Lamb. That one is clear. Behold, the Lamb of God will take away the sins of the world. But there is no clear scripture that says the scapegoat represents Lucifer. But like I'm saying, as you read what is the fate of Lucifer and you understand the scenario of the end of time, then it is clear where that lies. All right, so that was really a little bit of housekeeping as we went back to this area and conclude. And I'm happy that Pastor is quoting Bible commentaries, etc. Because to me, that is what I expect, that when we cover topics within this session, just an hour and a half, 2 hours, that we should then do our own reading during the week. I know we're busy and we don't have time, but sometimes it's good just to reinforce what we've heard within the readings. So having said that, I think it's time now, if this thing will allow me, for us to go on to the next, our substantive topic for today. So again, I do just the general review. This was in the first lesson that we had, which looks like a long time as well. Back on April 4th, we had presented the world. We had talked about the Western world versus the Eastern world, and then we talk about Europe, and then the Middle East being kind of the center of where most of this activity was taking place. Having said that, we then did a more a physical map, if you will, that kind of focused a little bit more on Central Europe here and kind of showed what was taking place there. And then as we moved on, we kind of zeroed in on the fact that the real focus of this area is around Europe in particular. And let me just say that it is really more around the Mediterranean Sea, right? Because the Mediterranean Sea is a body of water that allowed for the development of all these nations over time. So that as people became very maritime in their travel and they use ships and boats, they move from various areas. So Israel is right around the strip of land here. You have Turkey, which is heavily exposed to you have Greece, which is exposed to the sea, and then you have Italy, which is a huge peninsula type formation dropping out into the sea, and the islands of Sicily and stuff, etc. And then Spain and Portugal and all that, and France, they're all exposed to the waters, right? We have the famous channel here between England and France. We have Germany also having some exposure to the waters. We have Denmark, where one of our brothers from Cochrane now lives. So we have a good sense of the history of these areas. And you have Northern Africa, which included Tunisia. Tunisia actually has an area here called Carthage, which is a very prominent city in the days of the ancients when they would use this to launch attacks sometimes on the southern side of Europe, all right? So Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, Syria, where the Assyrian empires and stuff. So that's kind of our major force going on. One of the things I want to emphasize very quickly is that if you were to draw a line along where I've put it here, just an imaginary line, you could easily make the distinction that there was an eastern side to Europe and there was a western side to Europe. I say that because today when we talk about Europe, we tend to talk only about Western Europe. A lot of times when we say Europe, we think about England, who just the other day executed Brexit and came out of the European Union. And then we talk about Spain and Portugal and France and Germany, who today seems to be one of the leading countries within Europe and is doing a lot. And then Greece, who had a lot of problems. But we forget that Turkey is also part of Europe. So this is important, because one of the things that we learned is that Turkey recently were admitted into the NATO, North Atlantic Trade Agreement Organization, which was really formed after World War II as a way of preventing the Soviets from really practicing the same kind of drama that they got from Germany. And people forget that even though Turkey is fiercely Muslim and led by Muslim law and stuff, and Erdogan is sometimes seen as a difficult dictator and somebody who runs his place with an iron fist, that he was still considered to be part of Europe. As a matter of fact, in later years, in the early days of the European Empire, they became something known as the Byzantine Empire. And we talk a lot about that today as we discuss Rome and its evolution of Rome. So I just wanted to give you that overview and understand that this is our point of focus. We've looked a lot in the Middle East around Babylon and stuff, but from today, we kind of shift our focus to Europe. And I would suggest that we be looking at both Western and Eastern Europe. Just look at where Italy is and understand that Italy, which is where Rome, Vatican, St. Petersburg Church, etc. All of that is in Western Europe. And again, which is typical when people talk about Europe, but other things are taking place, right? So in the Bible lands, really, if you were to look at our graphic, say Mediterranean Sea is the center of that. We're really talking Southern Europe, the Middle East, Asia Minor, and North Africa, right? That's a busy slide, but more important biblical lands. We started off talking about empires. It's just a quick refresh. And we said that when we talked about the Assyrian Empire, they were more along what is eastern side of the Mediterranean, and more the development was occurring more east of the Mediterranean. So all of these areas to the west here did not factor into the Assyrian empires because they were really focused along the Fertile Crescent, the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. And that was kind of where most of the drama was taking place. When we get to the Babylonian Empire, same thing. It is predominantly on the eastern side of the Mediterranean Sea, and it is focused on empires within this area here more than anything to the west. Keep that vision in your head. The Persians went even more towards the east. I talked about the fact that when Ahasuerus was the king of Persia in the book of Esther, his first wife was called Vashti, which we knew to be an Indian name, and suggested that they had reached as far as India. But he also made some sojourns to the west when he captured Egypt, and then he still had a portion of Macedonia and Greece and stuff, but not quite to the full western exteriors out there where Spain and Portugal and that kind of thing was, right? And then we had Alexander the Great and the Greek Empire. Of course, Greek would have been along this section of land here where we have today Greece and Thrace and Macedonia, etc. But as the Greeks expanded towards the east, they conquered a lot of land, and even though Alexander died early, his generals continued the push that he did, and Greece became the empire. When we get to Rome, however, there's a significant shift, as you could see. So here is Rome now, but Rome is originating out of Italy and this stretch of land here and stuff. But Rome is decidedly more Western in its focus. And they still have, because this is now Turkey, they still have some Eastern dominance, right? So Rome is truly, if you were to say which one of those empires truly ruled the world, one could argue that Rome was that empire, because Rome really covered both East and West in a significant way, and also included Judea and all the Holy Lands and part of Northern Africa. All right, so let's remember that, right? So these are just some, other than the symbolic representation, these are more graphical and geographic representations that we see going on from time to time. I just will slide through these very, very quickly. You can always find a map and go through them. Persian Empire, I told you, you see how far it had gone all the way down to India and how much of the Caspian Sea and stuff it had captured and parts of what is modern day Russia and that kind of thing today. That is the movement that was taking place. We talk about Alexander. And then this is one that I will keep coming back to. This was a representation of the Roman Empire. Now notice that there's a key here that suggests that some of them were what we call senatorial provinces, and then some of them were what we call imperial provinces. Imperial means, of course, that they are run by a king and somebody who has desires to keep expanding. In the early days, the Romans and the Roman Empire is a very interesting empire, and we talk a lot about that. But they were run by a senate, and they practiced some semblance of democracy. I won't say all democracy, but some semblance of democracy. And then eventually that gave way. By the time we got to Julius Caesar and Brutus, and the rise of Julius Caesar as an emperor just before Christ, BC. And then by the time we got to Christ, we were talking about Caesar Augustus ruling the world, and then Tiberius and all that kind of thing, right? So clearly the Romans practice traditional emperor type leadership, monarchies, if you will, but they also practice some semblance of representational leadership, where people went into the Senate and represented certain areas and they made laws and decisions, etc. So that's why sometimes you hear the reference to the Roman Republic. And those who study law will go back to Roman and Latin representation. Latin was primarily the Roman language and gained its prominence within the world, if you will. And then if these Europeans, if these are succeeded by European nations, and then the Europeans came to the West to start civilizations, and you begin to understand why some of our parents were studying Latin in school, because that was still the Roman influence that was taking place. Though that even sections of Britain was at one time under the Roman rule, but we know the history of that, and they soon liberated themselves under various kings and knights, etc., and came into a different place. So effectively, and I didn't draw it, but I'll do it later on. If you were to draw an imaginary line, you would have Eastern Rome, which includes sections of Turkey, etc. And then you have Western Rome, which included some of the peninsular areas. Again, the fulcrum, or the center, if you will, is the Mediterranean Sea. So everything is centered around the Mediterranean Sea because, of course, travel and commerce, etc., is taking place through boats and maritime vessels, and kingdoms were strong based on the strength of their naval fleet and that kind of stuff, right? As I told you, the eastern section, it's a kind of strange map, I hope you can kind of see. So this is the western area here, but the eastern section of Rome eventually became what we refer to as the Byzantine Empire. And that's where we had the Turks and all that kind of stuff, and we'll talk a little bit about that going forward. Any questions on that quick recap before we go forward? I think we're making better time today than most, so let's see how quickly we can keep going. So having said that, I wanted to, you must be breathing a sigh of relief to finally see Daniel again, right? So I want to just remind you that in the book of Daniel, in Daniel chapter 2, God, before all of these civilizations have been established, before they were established, I want to make that point, before they were established, God prophesied through his prophet Daniel, even though the vision was given to Nebuchadnezzar, that these nations will come up after Babylon. So long before Rome was established, we had a representation of Rome in Daniel's vision. And that is what makes the Bible phenomenal. It is not a history book. The Bible never positioned itself and those who compiled it as a history book. It was a prophetic book. It was a book that reflected God speaking to man, his people. And in speaking to man and using thought inspiration, he would draw heavily on historical antecedents and the things that were happening around various times. And that is what is reflected in the Bible. So I know in our lesson study this week we talk about archaeological finds, etc., that will support the Bible, and that's great. But the fact is, I choose to believe the Bible not because of its historical accuracy, but I have the faith to believe that it represents God speaking to man. And as a result of that, the references to history are accurate because they represent people in those times who were speaking and giving us anecdotal evidence of what God was saying to them. Right? So in Daniel's vision, and remember this vision was interpreted itself by the angel who gave Daniel the vision. In this case, it was God who gave it to him in a dream. And later on, when we get to Daniel 7, we'll actually go over this again, because this is another prophecy that comes up where the same sequence is repeated again. So he said, thou art the head of gold. So we knew the head of gold is Babylon. He was soon replaced with Belshazzar in Daniel chapter 5 by the Medes and the Persians, Darius and Cyrus the Great. And then we know that Alexander came up after a while. The Greeks had actually practiced this same approach of distributed leadership. Every province had their leaders and they ran their own areas, and sometimes they will collaborate, but there was no supreme leader. Alexander's father was one of those who brought an end to that and said, we need to unite under one leader. And then as he died, Alexander took over at a very young age and moved with real aggression and real speed, and he united all of Greece and enlarged the empire significantly. But he died at a very young age, and I think it was said at the age of 32. He was succeeded by his 4 generals who carried the empire north, south, east, and west. And we'll talk about that one day, because the ones to the west, Ptolemy and Seleucid, became early lands of which the Roman Empire grew out of. So that is also important, right? And then we had the Roman Empire. So that's another important point. If you read the history of Rome before Christ, there's a strong representation that the Roman Empire started way before Christ's birth. Some people have it as early as 743 BC. Now, all around that time, we would have still had some of these kingdoms in full domination. So it just meant that the nation would have started to grow and develop as a tiny nation. But eventually, its dominance really occurred around 168 BC when the Greek Empire encountered decline. And then the Roman Empire came into being thereafter. And then we said that after Rome, and after Rome's demise, it would be difficult to see any one person or one nation having complete domination over the world. And that is so true. And that even the fragments of Rome will not come together, but that they will remain sort of mixed up with different traditions and different approaches, foreign policies, trade policies, governance structures, etc. But there will still be semblance of Rome in them, because you are seeing the feet of iron and clay. And we know the prophecy said that in the era of this feet of iron and clay, God will establish his kingdom and it will last forever, which is exactly the period we are living in today. All right? So just remember that. Now, when we start to study Rome, there are volumes of information around Rome that I cannot read in a short space of time. And some of you who have studied European history, I still challenge you to whether or not you have covered the full gamut of the Roman Empire. It's huge. So there are a few works around the place, and I kind of, between the internet and some of the books, I kind of focus, right? So history.com, of course, had a lot of stuff around the ancient Roman Empire. There's some important little videos there. There's a book called The Story of Christianity, the early church to the dawn of the Reformation, by a guy called Gonzalez. I got that on Kindle, and that was good. And then there is the classic, which I think Christians have used over the years, written by a guy from England called Edward Gibbon, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Pretty long and very extensive bit of literature. If you have the time and you could read it, great. But there are clippings and subsets of it all over the net, and you can kind of look for that and read it. But this is a classical bit of work, and he actually, interestingly, when Gibbon wrote his book, he actually made a reference to Daniel's vision and likened Rome to the feet of iron and clay. So that just goes without saying that the early middle-aged scholars were also very deep students of Bible, and they use the Bible. We have seen that Isaac Newton and others as well who were able to interpret sections of the Bible. So just to say, I thought it's an important disclaimer to let you know that I am not, I may sometimes sound as if I know this thing to the T, but I don't. I depend on the literature like everybody else and read it and try to figure out what the pieces are saying compared to what the Bible is. So again, if we went back to the representation of the head of gold, we have some time frames that we looked at when we looked at Daniel chapter 2. I just want to keep that in mind. So when I told you the Roman Empire was, some people said as early as 700 and something, we begin to appreciate it was very small and very embryonic at that point in time. But Babylon was the one who was running the show and doing things, right? So Rome, in the true sense of the word, in terms of its military and hegemonic might, the ability to continue to grab nations and control them, etc., is really around 168 BC, and it says here to 476. But I'll come back to that. Because one of the things we'll discuss today is that the Roman Empire seemed to have longevity and the ability to last for a very, very long time. All right, so that is something that we will discuss in great detail. Just to quote the scriptures so that this is a Bible class after all, so whereas you saw the feet of and toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom will be divided. We discussed that. The dream is certain and the interpretation thereof. So when we did chapter 2, we talked about all of this, but I thought I should just remind you, because some of you are starved for the book of Daniel with all this other stuff we've studied. I'm just kind of bringing you home that this is where we're headed, right? So Alexander really came to prominence around 331 BC, and he conquered the Medes and the Persians and ruled. And when you say rule here, I think it's important to appreciate not Alexander himself, because he died early, but the strength of the Greek Empire continued until around 168 BC. So maybe just short of a 200-year period, but it's still a significant period of time. By 168 BC, Rome, in whatever incarnation it was, started to become very dominant and could very well be classified as having ruled the world. And then this 476 date comes up and we talk about that. They were very violent and they smashed other countries, right? So it's important, if you go back to the map that we've grown accustomed to now, to recognize that most of Rome is confined to southern Europe, but there are still other people living in these other areas, and then there are people living in the African nations around. So I want you to appreciate that here is Rome establishing its kingdom on the periphery, on the perimeter, if you will, of the Mediterranean Sea, and hugging all the main important lands here, and taking control of them. But they are leveraging control to these other areas more by influence and their governors and rulers in these outlying areas. But there's a boundary here where things are always dynamic. There are always battles taking place. Because these barbarian tribes, and we use the word barbarian maybe in this era of Black Lives Matter, I don't know if it is politically correct to call them barbarians. But it was seen as not belonging to the kingdom of Rome. And as a result, there was a constant aggression taking place where these northern citizens and kingdoms would attempt to break into Rome. But of course, if Rome had its might and its power, it will always kind of subdue them. But how long you could do that for depends on how strong the kingdom was and what time the kingdom started disintegrating. The other point I want to make is that when we discuss Babylon, when we did the early chapters of Babylon, we agreed, you and I, we discussed this in great detail, that the Babylon approach to colonization, when Babylon invaded a place, they converted everybody to paganism, to their beliefs. That's why Daniel's Azariah and others' names were changed to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? Because they wanted to make them become like the Babylonians, and then they wanted them to eat Babylonian food and to learn Babylonian ways, right? So Babylon, I told you, not only conquered, but converted, right? So the Romans, however, a little bit smarter. And what the Romans did was that they allowed people to continue to kind of continue with some of the ways they operated in. So the Jews, for instance, are a good example of that. We talk about Herod Temple. Herod Temple was built during the time of Roman domination, but Herod was a king of the Jews. So because he had a good relationship with the Romans, they helped him to build this magnificent temple. And the trade-off was that if you were allowed to do your stuff, then you should give your full allegiance to the Roman Empire. That's how they killed Jesus. Because what the Jews then said is that they came to the Romans and they said, this man is saying he's a king, which is against the Roman belief that there is only one emperor, which is Caesar. And therefore you should be destroyed. And when Pilate reviewed it, he said, no, you don't have a case here. And then they said, all right, in our laws and in our way of living, nobody should claim to be a god against our God, so he should be destroyed. So they first leveraged, if you will, Jesus against Roman culture and Roman laws. And when that didn't work, that was like a federal law, if you will. They didn't come back and say, all right, in our state, you cannot do that, so Jesus needs to be destroyed. It's an interesting thing to see, because what it says is that coexisting together was Jewish customs and Roman customs, and that is important. Now that's really, really important as we go through today's session, because I wanted to appreciate that as Rome expanded and it encountered all these various nations, a lot of these people were practicing their own form of religion. And the Romans initially said, well, you could continue to practice what you want and however you wish to worship, just as long as you continue to observe the overall laws of Rome and you allow us to have our taxes and see what king is important, right? Then over the years, something started to happen. And the Romans found a way of, I will use the term now, I'll come back to it, it's called syncretism. So the Romans found a way of syncretizing. We talk about synthesis and synergetic energy, where we're able to take one thing, add one and one and get three. So the Romans found a way of being able to take the best of or the worst of the various religions and kind of synergize them, bring them together, and found ways in which there was cross-fertilization. So if you ask me, the Romans were the first civilization, if you will, that really pushed the ecumenical type of approach that says all gods are really one God. No, they kept the plural, it wasn't one God. They just assumed that the various gods you were worshiping were part of our gods. And that's a really important point that we'll come back to, but I wanted to make the point that surrounding the Roman Empire was this constant push of the barbarians. And over time, we developed this phrase, the barbarians at the gate. It came from that because they were always pushing and trying to destroy. So some of the barbarians, there were 10 in particular that were identified as after Rome, 10 tribes divided up Western Roman Empire. That's another point I want to make. So when we talk about the destruction of Rome, we're really talking about the western part of Rome. And there are about 10 tribes were identified. And at that stage, when we say Western Rome, including Italy, which is where the actual city of Rome existed, right? So there were 10 tribes, if you will. They carried various names like Ostrogoths, Vandals, Visigoths, Franks, Alemanni, Hurai, whatever, right? Lombards, etc. So these were various tribes that were coexisting with the Romans along the way, but as time went on, they became stronger and stronger, and based on their own leadership, etc., they would make forays into the Roman Empire and destroy the Romans sometime at time. So you would find then that the Roman Empire is existing, but there are sections of it that are very, very weak, and you can't control it. That is not uncommon. Even today, Imran Khan, one of my favorite cricketers, is now the Prime Minister of Pakistan. And he talks sometimes about the fact that there are some areas of northern Pakistan that overlaps with Afghanistan where they have no control. The tribal leaders control it. It's still their area, but it's still their general area, but the tribal leaders are the ones who rule it. And they have to kind of coexist with them. We saw that in the Americans' first sojourn war into Afghanistan. They had to enjoin the tribal leaders into their attacks because the actual conventional government in Pakistan couldn't really control those areas. So in a similar way, while Rome would have been consolidating its power here in Italy and then later in Turkey and Constantinople, and they're trying to control the whole area, these tribes are constantly battling and trying to make control. And eventually, when Rome is destroyed around 476, these are the tribes that start to make their battles. So you see Italy is here, and they're making their battles to come in and take over sections of Rome, right? So again, tribes, these are where the tribes are all located. So there are some in Southern Europe, there are some in Northern Europe, and they are making their efforts. Again, this is an important point because we'll come back to this in Daniel chapter 7, where I could give you a hint from now and tell you, God in that prophecy actually prophesied that these 10 tribes will overtake the Roman Empire. Which is phenomenal if you think about that, because this is a prophecy given way back in 600, 500 and something BC. And God is predicting what will happen in 476 AD, which is on the other side of Christ's birth, right? So that, I always find that to be phenomenal. This is just a modern day look of Europe. I know the image mightn't be all that clear, and I apologize for that. But I wanted to let you know that where we traditionally would have seen Turkey, this was a part of the Roman Empire. By the way, when we get to Revelation, you realize that John wrote the book of Revelation on the Isles of Patmos. And the Isles of Patmos was a rugged island just off this western coast of Turkey here, which is kind of where they used as a prison, because it was so jagged and so hard to approach unless you had a vessel to go to it. And it was so deep you couldn't swim for it and had sharks, etc. So again, this just reinforces the fact that Eastern Europe was very, very prominent, even just after the time of Christ, and really represented a key part of the European and Northern, the Roman Empire going forward. Now, I hinted to you just now something, and I want to go back to that, right? So Gomez in his work, he made an important statement. He said, in order to achieve greater unity, imperial policies sought religious uniformity by following two routes. So I just unpack that a little bit, right? So the Romans wanted to achieve greater unity in the empire. And I told you the Babylonians would have beaten everybody and converted them to Babylon religion. The Romans had a little bit more finesse. At least it looked that way, but they had the same intent. They wanted to create unity. They wanted to create sameness, if you will, right? And for them, unity wasn't necessarily, today we talk about having unity in diversity. And there are some people who don't understand that, so they put knees on necks. But if it is, you understand that there can be unity in diversity, then you can peacefully coexist. So the Romans, what they did is they practiced something called syncretism. And he described that as the indiscriminate mixing of elements from various regions. But it's important, because it's important to note that the Romans believed in syncretism. So what they did is, as they went along and they conquered a nation, they said, what are your religious beliefs? They said, well, we believe in a God who is of stone and he could turn stone into gold. They say, right, well, we have a similar God somewhere in another place that believe in somebody who had the magic of touch and Midas, etc. And so they brought them together and said, let's find out what is common rather than what is separate, and develop that into a common thinking and religion. That becomes very important as we go along. The other thing that they decided to practice, which is phenomenal when you think about it, in the context of this republic that they first tried, is that they also believe in emperor worship. So I'll talk about that, right? So syncretism became a fashion at the time. So once they started to practice syncretism, what they really was saying is that all religions should try to kind of come together, and let's all remember we're serving the same God. Sound familiar? And that we should all just kind of do the same thing, right? So in that atmosphere, he says, Jews and Christians, two sects that have their origins with Jesus, were seen as unbending fanatics who insisted on the sole worship of their one God. And so they were seen as an alien cyst. You know, as a cyst, right? A growth within your system that you want to get rid of. That must be removed for the good of society. So you would find that over time, the Jews and the Christians were a difficult bunch to manage. And I would say first the Jews, right? The Romans couldn't get the Jews to align to their way of thinking. And then later when Christianity came up, even though Christianity had differences with the Jews who didn't believe that Christ was the Son of God, and you know Paul had real problems trying to convince them of that. They both, however, demonstrated a similar approach to Daniel where they remained faithful to their God. So just as how Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were unwilling to bow down to the God on the plain of Dura, that golden image, so too the Jews and the Christians were unwilling to be, I call it assimilated and become integrated completely within this thinking of syncretism. So I'll ask you to keep that word in your head for the rest of this lesson, because we'll come back to it. And know that was an attempt, if you will. You know, it's like a musical conductor who I always admire. A musical conductor is able to take these many different instruments, trombone, flute, piano, steel pan in some cases, and bring them all together and create a harmonious outcome. That was what the Romans were hoping. That if they could break all the various practices, beliefs of the various nations they had conquered, then they would get them together. The problem was that some people were more, were not as pliable as others. And so the Jews and the Christians stood out as those who would kind of fight back on that whole thing. And then when it came to emperor worship, well, that was even worse, right? Because the ruling emperor was kind of seen as somebody who should be worshipped and who should be seen with a certain degree of reverence. And the Jews and the Christians, I would argue more so the Christians, kind of said, no. Our understanding of the scriptures was that our only allegiance should be to God and not to anybody else. I mean, they read the commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me, thou shalt not bow down and serve them, etc. So that the Christians who were brought up on the belief that Jesus was the Son of God, they refused to burn incenses before the emperor's image. And they did so as a witness of their faith. But the authorities condemned them as being disloyal and seditious. That's an important word, because it meant that they were a threat to the republic and to the government and to the kingdom. And as a result of being branded as seditious, they obviously would be persecuted and destroyed. So I say that because these two slides set the basis for what would be the persecution of Christians under the Roman Empire. A lot of times when we talk about the Romans and we talk about them persecuting Christians, I always struggle because I can't understand why were Christians being persecuted. When you understand these two concepts of syncretism and emperor worship, you begin to understand what was happening here, because the Romans trying to control a vast area, and this is no internet era, this is no video conferencing, nobody has Snapchat and Facebook and whatever, no Alexia and stuff. So really, they would depend upon the regional leaders to enforce the thinking of Rome as a whole. And so consequently, that syncretism was meant to say, if you could find comfort in the Roman way of worship and religion, etc., or we could find comfort in yours, then that whole leveling and new normal, let's use that, after they had come together, would represent a better place to operate in, a peaceful place, and if you're fighting an anarchy and that kind of thing. And at the same time, then, if you also, while you did that, recognize that the emperor is supreme, then you had the best of both worlds. You have people who saw the emperor as supreme and demonstrated his supremacy by worshiping him and offering incense to him. And then you had those who would be able to still observe their own religions and do what they feel comfortable with, right? So that was the thinking. Again, if we draw imaginary line, you had Western Rome and you had Eastern Rome as the key points at that period of time, right? When we come back to modern day times, I'm saying that that distinction still exists. I've put this line a little bit too, maybe too west of Greece, because Greece is seen as part of Western Europe today. But that was kind of how everything was established going forward. Any questions? Before I go forward, but we covered at a good pace today, so hopefully we can finish on time. But this is key foundation for us to get into Daniel chapter 7. A lot of times in the past, I've done it myself as trying to teach Daniel and Revelation. And we jump right into chapter 7 and then we start to talk about some of these things, but it doesn't make sense because we don't understand the context. I like to give the big pictures. What we're doing today is trying to understand how the Romans operated as a nation. And this is all factual. This is not any slant towards us having a religious perspective on it. It's simply presenting the facts, which I told you is readily available in Edward Gibbon's book on the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. And then this guy we just quoted, Gonzalez, on the rise of the Christianity in the era of the Reformation. All right, so let's talk some major milestones. Easy slides, but don't get worried. Let's unpack it a little bit. So this is a slide that goes from 0 to 180. All right, so this is after Christ. There's a period, of course, where Christ's life is just about 30 years, or generic terms, 30 years here. They talk about a period where Peter is in Jerusalem and Antioch doing his work. Peter goes on various missions in Rome, and then there are various bishops of Rome, which are people who are leading the churches of Rome during that period, right? So this is 70 to 180. That's one level. We also have Paul's many journeys occurring here during the period of around 46 AD to 67 AD. And there are even other periods when Paul would have done a significant amount of his journey. He tries to show when Paul had his conversion and when there was some Jerusalem council. This is counted in the book of Acts chapter 15. If you read the book of Acts chapter 15, there's an interesting other arguments that occur in there about whether people could become Christians if they are not circumcised, etc. And Paul had to deal with that discrimination way back then, similar to other discrimination that's taking place today, which is even more reason why the church needs to be vocal when there's discrimination. But that's just my two-piece word I had to show you. And then Stephen was stoned around, we believe it was AD 34. I saw this, I just pulled this off the net, so this is not a church's document per se. But Stephen was stoned around AD 34, and that was a key point because Stephen's stoning but Stephen's stoning impacted Paul significantly. And Paul, who witnessed Stephen's stoning, eventually changed from Saul to Paul and became a powerful missionary for Christianity and carrying the message forward, right? So the important thing to also note is that around this time we had an emperor in Rome called Nero. And we talk about that. You often hear about fiddling while Rome burns. And we talk, whenever we use that phrase, we think about Nero. And then I wanted to pay attention to AD 70 because something important happened here. This is when the Jerusalem temple was destroyed by a Roman general called Titus. So he eventually became an emperor, but he led a very important march to Jerusalem. And this is actually represented and predicted in Matthew chapter 24, when Jesus answers to his disciples, when shall these things be, and when shall be the sign of thy coming? He actually talked about the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. This was a bloody battle. Josephus, who is a Jewish historian and wrote extensively on Jewish history, Josephus talks about the Roman army under Titus marching into Jerusalem. And when they saw the beauty of the temple, they held back for a bit. And the Jews who were hiding in various places, when they saw him hold off for a bit, they saw that as an opportunity to run out of the city and to save themselves. But others, and he held back for a few days, others stayed within the temple and they continued their rebellion, because by then the Jews had become very rebellious and they felt they should be under Roman subjection. And that is not unusual, because during Jesus' time, you know, the Jews, I just add this, I don't mean to preach to you all, but during Jesus' time, when the Jews realized that Jesus could heal people and raise people from the dead, and then he could take loaves and fishes and feed thousands of people, they saw Jesus as the consummate general. Matter of fact, there's a section in Luke and in the Gospels that says that they lay hands upon him to make him their ruler. And Jesus had to slip out of the crowd and go into a boat and went away and hide from them, because the people thought he represented the ideal person to lead them, because he could heal them when they got injured, and then he could provide food for them while they were fighting the Romans. So the Jews were always against Roman domination, and that swelled into open rebellion by the time we got to AD 70. And the Romans were sent to crush the rebellion of the Jews. And when they got there, they eventually destroyed the temple. They shot a fire arrow into the door. It was burned. And then the Roman soldiers went in, and Josephus argues and says to us that as the Romans walked through the temple, slaughtering the Jews, shouldn't be the best word for it, they were walking into knee-high blood, because it was such a terrible scene, right? This was just after the AD 60s, when Rome was destroyed in a fire, when Nero was the emperor, and the Romans were very, very infuriated over the fact that he had burned the city down through his own negligence. And he in turn said, well, it was because of these Christians who are not paying homage to us, they brought us bad luck. And they are the ones who caused the city to burn. So the Christians became a target of persecution, driven by the emperor of Rome, which is an interesting construct, if you will, right? So this is just keep these key points in the slide together. That AD 70 we had the destruction of Jerusalem, and it happened after Nero's problems with his own people after the fires in Babylon. In Jerusalem, and Rome, and just to keep all of that together as we go forward. This one is a bit of a complicated slide, but I wanted to make another point as I go through this slide. So today we have a proliferation of religions. Everybody, Baptists, Pentecostals, Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's, whatever, Roman Catholics, Presbyterians, etc. There are a lot of different religions who all claim to believe Jesus Christ. But of course, there are those who are Islamic and Hindus, etc., and other religions. But I wanted to appreciate that when we were discussing Christianity here, we're not talking about different churches. We had one church, one Christian church. And that one Christian church was the church that we're discussing, right? So for most of the period, there was only one, and I have no problems being referred to as the Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, because it was the only Christian church. As time went on and we got into the middle centuries, and we'll talk about that today, we saw some schisms, if you will, and some of the churches in the East, remember the eastern side of Europe, started to form their own beliefs. Now, early in the Christian religion, when we get to Revelation and we start to talk about the lessons of the seven churches and stuff, and if you read some of the epistles of Paul, there's no doubt that in the one Christian church, there were different beliefs that were springing up. There's some people thought that God was in everything. Some people said that they could gain salvation through other ways, etc. And if you read some of the letters Paul wrote to the Hebrews, the Romans, Thessalonica, Corinthians, etc., a lot of times Paul was acting as a pastor, and he was trying to quell the many different beliefs that were popping up in the various churches. But the fact is, there was only one church. And it really wasn't until the middle, until way past 1000 AD, that the eastern side of Rome went in its own way, and today the Eastern Orthodox Church still exists. So if you go to those Eastern nations in Bosnia, Herzegovina, Croatia, some of those Eastern European countries, they have a system of religion that is very, very similar to what you experience in the Catholic, Roman Catholic Church today. But it is called Eastern Orthodox Church, right? And then those in the West, if you will, continued along. And we come to why it was called Roman. Catholic simply means universal. So it really meant the universal church. And the Roman name came as a result of having a period where the Roman Empire, the declining Roman Empire, designated the church as its official religion. All right, so there's value in that, and I just thought I'll establish that. We know why they are Anglicans, because we know that the king of England wanted to marry, wanted to divorce his wife and marry somebody else, and when the church refused to do that, he formed his own church, which was the English Catholic Church, EC as we refer to it. Some of you went EC schools, etc. And they later on, after they did that, they adopted beliefs and practices that were very similar to the Catholic Church, but they kept their nomenclature, their designation as Anglican, right? So again, this is meant to represent a very intense and very detailed period in a very simplistic way to suggest that for most of the early centuries, there was only one Christian church. And I think that's important because sometimes some of us Protestant religions, we like to bash the Catholic Church, like to beat them up and say all kind of things about them on pulpits and in crusades and stuff. And I want to be very, very clear and very respectful to say that I think some of that is misplaced if you understand the historical record and appreciate that up until the time of Martin Luther, who didn't put his 95 Theses on the wall until 1517, more than 500 years ago, just about 500 years ago. Up until that time, the only Christian church is what is today known as the Roman Catholic Church. So this is the remnant of that period, right? So all the other religions, Lutherans, Reformed, the Baptists, etc., all that kind of thing, came up out of Luther's Reformation and his Protestant origins and his 95 Theses on the wall of the church in Germany. All right, so this is 1517. So if you think about that from a historical perspective, that's a short time compared to the amount of time that we remain as one Christian church. So the history of the Catholic Church is the history of all Christian churches. And the quicker we begin to accept that, I think is the better we have a better appreciation as to the origins of some of the belief systems that are challenged today, because that is also important as we go forward. All right. Just to remind you about the New Testament era, and then to note that there's a period in here where there are a significant number of councils that focus heavily on the Christian religion. And this is when you had various councils that established which books will become the Bible and become the combined book of the Bible, etc. There were different kings and stuff who presided over all of this. Remember, Rome is not a monolithic society. So I think early in the presentation, somebody asked me, who was the king of Rome compared to Nebuchadnezzar and Alexander and Cyrus and Darius? We couldn't come to that because there were plenty of people who ran Rome over the years. Julius Caesar was just before Christ, the Caesar Augustus, the Tiberius, the various, and I will talk today about Diocletian and Constantine and Justinian and all kind of thing. There were many different emperors along the way, but the fact is that this is how Rome was run. So before we get into the actual timelines, I'm going to take any questions at this stage, because I think we are again doing good on time, and I want to get into the timeline. So any questions, anybody? You looking okay? Great. I like the fact that you all are so quiet and everybody is okay. It looks like you are very pious and studious today, right? So let's keep going. So what I want to do today now is to put up a timeline, and I want to say to you that this is this is my own timeline, so I take full responsibility for it. I I have no obligation to make it an academic exercise. So if some of the dates are wrong and I use tildes, these are the curly things to give you approximate and stuff where I can. But just gleaning from the readings and stuff, I wanted to have an appreciation of the fact that I wanted to establish some timelines because I think it's important to land on certain things as we go forward. So I'll go through this twice. In this first view, I'll take this view of the timeline, and there's another view I will take. But I cannot just say the same things twice, so at least by repetition, it stays with you. The first thing I want to establish that Christ was born somewhere around 3 to 4 AD, right? Not at 0 point as some of you think, but about 3 to 4 AD. And before that, you had the Rome, which is what I call the before Christ era, right? So, and like I told you, that could go back to as far as 700 BC. I'm not a fan of that because the real power we saw in Rome came around 168 BC. But this is when you had the early rise of the kingdom and it transitioned to a republic, and then to empire, and then again under Julius Caesar it became an empire. So Julius Caesar was considered to be the first real emperor of Rome. And then he gave way, obviously he died, and he gave way to Caesar Augustus, and then Tiberius and others and that kind of thing. By the way, those of us who are Star Trek fans will realize that a lot of the Roman names are finding themselves in the Star Trek, right? So Kirk was James Tiberius Kirk, James T. Kirk, and there were the Romulans. Romulus was one of the early leaders of the Roman nation. So maybe the Star Trek writers way back then would have tapped in a lot into Roman culture. But that's just a trivia along the way, right? So the first thing I want to establish is that there was a period before Christ when Rome was very much in its embryonic stage as a kingdom, and Julius Caesar kind of ran things. During Christ's time, of course, you would have had, he lived under Roman subjugation, and we had the life and death of Christ. We would have had him resurrected, and then Stephen was stoned. But what would have happened when Stephen was stoned? Because Stephen was a Jew, and the Romans, Stephen was a Christian. He was a Jew, became a Christian, and the Jewish leaders didn't like the fact that this gospel was spread. Remember, the Jews crucified Jesus, and they said that Jesus was a heretic. So they were very against a religion that spurred up after Jesus' death, based on his 12 disciples, who were now spreading that Jesus was the Son of God. And so that belief changed and had a point of departure with Judaism, because Judaism says, well, we're still looking for the Messiah. Christians were saying, no, the Messiah came and he died already, and now we must live looking for his second coming. So that caused a huge point of departure. And when Stephen was stoned, the disciples realized that Jerusalem was too much of a hotbed to continue preaching the gospel. And so they started to spread the gospel and preach it to other areas, Macedonia and Corinthia and Thessalonica and other areas, right? Now, I want us to also appreciate that because Rome was such an organized and powerful nation, and so based on good engineering, that Rome had already established good roadways and highways within Europe and good pathways through the sea and stuff. They had established regular ship transport. Now, all of that was to advance the Roman Empire. But at the same time that they were doing that, it facilitated the spread of the gospel. And I find that fascinating because I think about the era we're in now with COVID-19 and how easily churches have migrated towards the internet to spread the gospel. And the internet was created to facilitate universities and schools and colleges and researchers for accessing information to continue their scientific advances. But later on, as the World Wide Web came and stuff, it evolved into a whole backbone to facilitate electronic communication, sharing of information, doing various things, right? Nobody built it for Christianity, but Christianity has grown significantly because of the internet and YouTube and messaging live stream and video conferencing and all the various parts of it, right? In a similar way, Rome was established, if you will, to just facilitate the growth of Europe and Eastern Western Europe. But that infrastructure facilitated the growth of Christianity. And that's why if you read the book of Acts, you begin to realize that the church grew phenomenally in the book of Acts, because the guys could just pick up and walk and move to various areas and collect chariots and stuff and get to different areas or travel and see as Paul did from time to time. And when they got to other places, they were able to preach their gospel. All right, so I just to know that. In the 60s, 80s, we had Nero as the leader of Rome, and we are told that Nero was really opposed to the Christians because one, they were not part of the syncretism, so they were not assimilated and blending in. And then when the city was burnt and the people of Rome wanted to overthrow Nero, he said, well, them Christians are them who weren't following what we believe, they're the ones who caused all of this, right? So there was a huge amount of persecution of Christians, I would say in particular, and Jews to a certain extent, that occurred in the period just after Christ's death and before AD 70. I talked to you about AD 70 already, and I told you that AD 70, which was very well predicted in Matthew 24, the Romans put on a rebellion by the Jews and they destroyed the temple and the people scattered, right? So from that time until around, I use a cutoff point here of 290 AD. So this is the first 2 centuries and almost heading to the 3rd century of after Christ. The church grows. So Christianity is spreading because people are now able to travel and talk about this Jesus Christ. They quote from Paul. They're able to talk about all that he had done. And more people, if you read the book of Acts, more and more people are becoming Christians. There are regular conflicts with the Jews, and there are frequent periods of persecution. And multiple religions kind of coexist in this space going forward, right? Around AD 300, we had an emperor called Diocletian. Diocletian was a kind of no-nonsense kind of man, and he didn't like the fact that these Christians were not part of emperor worship. I might tell you there were two kind of key principles that evolved according to Gonzalez in his book. And he said it was syncretism, which was being able to assimilate and blend all the various beliefs into something that everybody could live with. And then the other was emperor worship. So Diocletian was not happy with that. And therefore he went through a period of deliberate persecution of the Christians. So the Christians were targeted. And that's when you talk about people being burned to the stake. This morning, Pastor Valdez did an excellent job for the Zonal Church on Zoom, and he talked about Polycarp, who went to be burned to the stake, and how he thanked God for giving this opportunity to die for him. All of that was occurring around this period, people becoming martyrs. And one author, I remember Maxwell in his book said, the aura of punishment was worse than the punishment itself. I mean, there was so much fear that the Christians experienced, and they lived in catacombs, and Ellen White talks about that in Great Controversy, how much of them were hiding in various tombs and tunnels, etc., to get away from the Christians. Those of you who watch TBN, and there's a children's program where, I can't remember the name right now, but they keep running into the tunnels and hiding from the Roman soldiers, right, as Christians. So because the Christians were bending, Diocletian went on a very determined persecution of them. And then boom, we come to a man called Constantine. Now, Constantine is an interesting character because after Diocletian, who either died or was overthrown, I think it was dead, Constantine emerged as the new emperor. And he too was on the same agenda, if you will, to establish Rome as permanent and to make himself supreme. But something happened in one of his battles on a bridge in a place called, I can't remember the name of it properly, but it's in Italy, where he was about to go to battle, and he got a vision that evening of a cross as a standard. And he saw it as a very phenomenal thing. He said he heard a voice and stuff. So there's a little bit of legend and folklore around that. The other cannot take it with a grain of salt, but everybody seemed to suggest in unison that he got a vision. And in his vision, he saw an image of Christianity, meaning the cross. And he used that he built a standard. So if you remember in all the crusades and petitions you see in the old days, there'll be this standard, which is really a stick with a cross on it and something hanging from it. And they would use that when they go to war. And he built a standard and he went to war and he won. So when he won, Constantine was a little bit superstitious, not a little bit, very superstitious. And he thought, well, the Christians had helped him to win the battle. And Constantine himself converted to Christianity, which is phenomenal. Again, this is an important bit of detail because, again, even us Seventh-day Adventists, we like to bash Constantine and beat him up and say how he was this bad emperor who changed everything, but understand what was happening here. So he thought that if the Christian religion was so helpful for him, then he must elevate Christianity above everything else. And so that is exactly what he did. And in 312, 313, he basically declared Christianity to be the supreme religion. But of course, he is still practicing syncretism. So the Christianity he is establishing, and he begins to host a number of councils. So this is in another slide I'm here on now, the other section of the timeline, Constantine and the church, between 313 and 380. He holds a number of councils, which I showed you in the previous busy slide where I said that section is where there are a number of councils. And in here, they have the Council of Nice and others where they decide what books will become in the Bible. They talk about some of the beliefs and the systems, and I'll talk through a few of those. But there's in here some of the major beliefs of what was then the Christian church, which is today still practiced by the Catholic Church, were established, right? So in here you've got indulgences and the priest acting as a intercessor between the people and God, just similar to what you had in some of the other religions, some of the outlying nations. Is in here you start to talk about life after death and the fact that when people die, you could kind of pray and move their souls from one place to the next. Because syncretism, they were aligning, if you will, to some of the beliefs that were common in some of the other nations. I don't want to call them heathen nations, but the non-Christian nations that they had invaded. So what you formed then was a kind of potpourri and a coming together. And one of the bigger things that he did was that he declared Christianity, one of the kings eventually, I don't think it was actually Constantine himself, but one of those towards the end of around 380, he declared Christianity to be the official religion of the empire. But Constantine then also cemented the days of worship. And so he and this is just factual, we're not trying to convert anybody, but he said that he allowed the church to observe Sunday as a day of rest. So not only were they allowed to go to church, but he wrote into law that nobody's supposed to work on that day and take it into a great day of worship and stuff. The Christians, at least that part of the church that now move heavily into increasing the quantity of believers rather than the quality of their religion, and you can quote me on that. Those Christians who were leading them, they were quite happy to know that they got support from the state. And on top of that, they were quite happy to know that they could observe on Sunday, rather than the 7th day of the week, which was traditional time of worship. The Jews had done that for ages. The early Testament church had followed the same principle of coming to the synagogue on the 7th day of the week as the day of worship and Sabbath. But the new Christians didn't mind doing that because they, again, syncretism. So they said, well, maybe we should celebrate the birth of Christ, which occurred on the resurrection of Christ, which occurred on the 1st day of the week. And that gives us something in common with our friends who worship in the sun god, right? Because that was what they had used Sunday for as the sun god. And so they found a good compromise and a good form of cohesion there. And there was syncretism around all of that. But I'll come back and just list some of those things that came into battle. So the Constantinian era is an important era because Constantine helped to organize the church. He gave the church legitimacy. It was no longer just a bunch of religion by people who were supposedly apostles of Christ and were carrying his message mouth to mouth and were under constant persecution. Once the emperor, became a Christian, then all the persecution kind of ceased. So this was known as the era of peace. There's a Latin word for it, pax something. But it kind of means that it was a period of peace. So the church grew. Obviously, it will grow very, very fast because now there's no more persecution and attack. And at the same time, in growing, the church would have had to relax, but not had to, but chose to relax some of its belief systems, accumulate more people coming in. And that is where you found that a lot of their belief systems were now not aligned to what was captured in the very chronicles that they put together that call the Bible. So what you then had was a schism started to take place, where you found some of the believers. So there's not a lot of persecution occurring during this period, it really occurred before. But what also happened was that some of the people started to separate themselves and say, hey, we don't accept what you are saying, and so we will operate wildernesses and others. We'll operate separately from you because we think you have watered down the purity of our religion and our belief systems, and so we will go in our separate ways. So I want you to appreciate that the Constantinian era cemented the Christian church, but seemed to have created an opportunity for divergence of beliefs. Pax Romana, yes, Pastor gave me that. I'm happy about that, Pastor. Thank you. So it became a peaceful period. All right, so what then happened is that you then had, so this is a really nice era here. Everything looks, this is like heaven. I mean, you can ask them more than that. If the head of the state says you're okay, you could carry out your beliefs, and then you start to grow your numbers so much so. Somebody also told me that the TVN show is called Story Keepers. Thanks for that. Yes, I looked at that with my daughter when she was small, and I still look at it today. And it's really about the Christians hiding in the catacombs and stuff while they were being persecuted. So when you got to the Constantinian era, there was a real peace that occurred now for the Christians. But in that peace, the church became much more organized, consolidated. And then you had something established called the Bishop of Rome. So the head of the church was known as the Bishop of Rome, and he was kind of the head of the religious church. And this church is now, because he made it the official church of the religion, of the empire, sorry, the official religion of the empire. It spreads throughout the east and the west. And as you do that, you now have the head of the church taking on a real prominence because he's able to spread the message so far and make decisions about priests and people and lives and stuff. Meanwhile, the barbarians are breaking into the borders of Rome. And so Constantine is good in terms of establishing the church, making decisions, helping them with their syncretism and all that. But he's not good at being a good administrator. So the Roman Empire starts to crumble. Some argue that it crumbled just out of straight cash flow because they won't conquer nations and get in empires and all that kind of thing. And so the barbarians had to invade and break up sections of Rome. And soon, the western part of Rome is vanquished. I make a very clear distinction at this point between the western and eastern part of Rome, right? So what then happened was that if you were in the eastern half of the Roman Empire, life continues nowhere because they then moved the capital of Rome to Turkey, which is today known as Istanbul, but then it was known as the old city called Constantinople. So the Roman emperor lived in Constantinople, and in Italy, Rome was kind of seen as a second kingdom. It wasn't really the same power as the Eastern Kingdom. So all of that, because there was a migration of troops and power towards the east, it opened up the west to the vulnerability and the attack of the barbarian tribes. So the barbarians invaded and they controlled the place. But barbarians, just like everybody else, they had a lot of respect for the church. And a lot of times they would try to protect the Pope and the Bishop of Rome and make sure that he was not destroyed, and they gave him a lot of respect and that kind of stuff, right? So in the west, the churches, in the east, sorry, the church is still flourishing and the nation is still flourishing. In the west, however, the nation is in decline, but the church is in ascendancy because they have gained so much power from the period of Constantine. So we have a real dynamic taking place there. So then I said to you that somewhere around between 476 and 538 AD, we found that a different kind of Roman leadership emerges in the West with the blessings of the Eastern Empire. So the the emperor who lives in the Constantinople in the Eastern Empire, he says, well, how can I manage so far away? All right. So it looked like the barbarians have invaded everything and destroyed what I like to call civic Rome or political Rome. So he then turns to the priest and he says, yeah, the Bishop of Rome, we will give you civil protection so you can continue to grow the church and grow your work, but you'll also have civil powers. And so very early, and this was cemented in 538 AD, the head of the church became virtually a political and a civil head as well, right? So that's a kind of important juncture, if you will. The Eastern Roman Empire, this is the next slide I'm on now. The Eastern Roman Empire continues its reign and its transition to what is referred to as the Byzantine Empire. So if you read any history books and you talk about the Byzantine Empire, that's what we're talking about, right? So this is going on until 1453. In 1453, so notice how far this Roman Empire is going on. I tell you, Rome, you can't say Rome died in 476. The Western Rome died in 476. But Eastern Rome continued for a long time until around 1453, when the Turks, which were primarily Muslims, they invaded Constantinople and took over. And today, Turkey is known as a Muslim state rather than a Christian state. But if you go into Turkey and you take a tour of Constantinople, you see some of the finest Christian churches and basilicas and that kind of thing, because it was at one time a center of Rome and therefore was infused with Christianity to a significant extent. Around 570, with the rise of Muhammad, the Islam religion becomes a powerful entity in the East. And so they started to have the Crusades. So here you have, on the East, the Muslims are attempting to invade some of the Christian religions and convert them to Islam. And then the Christians are fighting back. But the strength of the Christian church is in the West. So the Bishop of Rome, which is where he exists, he is guiding and directing the Crusades with the Muslims. So there's a huge period, if you will, of constant battle that is taking place, which is very, very, I mean, we talk about it here glibly, but people losing their lives, and it was very, very drastic and very erratic and stuff, right? 538, again, his rule is characterized as persecution of true believers. So even though the Bishop of Rome became the real leader of the nation, those offshoots who were saying, now we think you have carried a religion too far and you have imbued it with different things, they were being persecuted as they went along, right? And then in 1517 now, so long after the decline of the Eastern Empire, but the church is still in existence. So the church is continuing to run things and keep itself in trade and stuff, right? So the Bishop of Rome is still controlling both East and West and kind of running, and he has civic power as well as religious power. Luther emerges. Luther is a young German priest who believes in righteousness by faith. He doesn't think he needs to do penances and stuff to earn his salvation. So he's having this great overbearing sense that he is guilty before God and a sinner. But when he contemplates how he has to be forgiven, he is not comfortable doing penances and cleaning steps and reciting parts of the Bible. He thinks that God is better than that. And then he remembers one day, while he was cleaning the steps going up to one of the chapels, he recalled Paul's writings in the book of Romans when he said, the just shall live by faith. That was a turning point for Luther, because he realized that his salvation came through his faith in Jesus Christ, and not by what he did. And so he renounced a lot of the practices of the church, and the fact that he could write 95 theses and put them upon the door of the church kind of told you how much beliefs and rituals and systems the church had introduced that was far removed from the original teachings that the Christians had started off with, right? So that's important. As time went on, and again, these are big jumps we're making here, and I don't mean to oversimplify history, but we only have an hour and a half and a little bit. So in 1798, by this time the French Revolution is in full cry, which occurred in the 1760s and stuff. The French Revolution is an interesting thing, again, because the church and the head of the church was if you watch any of the movies of the Three Musketeers that sometimes shows on TV, you'd see the role that the cardinal used to play. The church was seen as oppressive, and the French were kind of against all of this monarchy and stuff. So the French wanted to go republicanism. They wanted to take away the eliteness of people being granted privilege by hereditary and bloodlines and stuff. And they said, look, we believe in one man, one vote. There was huge demonstrations. There were the age of enlightenment. They started to say they believe in God and they don't believe in church. They believe in atheism. Around the same time, you had our good friend Darwin coming up with some of his stuff as well. So there was a whole new set of thinking that was taking place. And there was revolutions all through England. They were killing people with the guillotine and all that kind of stuff. And one of the biggest things they did was in 1798, they captured the Pope, who was by that time known as the Bishop of Rome, the head of the church. And they put him into captivity, into a dungeon actually, and thought that that was one way to kill the church completely and influence the church. Of course, the church didn't die, thank God. And around that same time, America is, look at the confluence. America is also gaining independence in 1776. America is really coming into being because a lot of the pilgrims who were fleeing from persecution from the church in Europe are now coming to America to start a whole new life and to make America their home, right? So their founding fathers are talking about freedom to worship whatever you want, really care who you worship, just freedom in this vast country, and all the various good things. Some of it we know are not manifested today, but still that was on an ideal basis. It was a powerful sentiment established in the founding fathers when they charted the American independence. And that is occurring at that point in time, right? It's important to know that the church didn't die, but the church continued, and she may have appeared wounded, but she rises again and remains permanent up to our current time. So that is our timeline. I mean, I just repeated the same things over and over again in some different slides, so I don't think I need to go over that again. I can always forward those slides. Sorry for going through this so fast. I know on the screen it looks confusing and we're moving that fast. But I want to establish some key things. So under Constantine, syncretism flourished. And so some of the beliefs that the church adopted, agreed to, and made law. So these are some of the things. Remember I told you that by 1517, Luther is putting up his 95 theses and protesting some of the beliefs of the church and the practice of the church and saying it doesn't make sense and it's not aligned to what Jesus taught. So that is what led to the birth of Protestantism. And then all the other splinter groups and churches we have today. I think all of us who are non-Catholic as Christians can anchor our origins in Martin Luther. All right? And what you then had was, so the first thing is that, and this is my list in here, right? So you can always look for more, but there are a few things that crept into the church during that era. You had the umbrella of Christianity. In other words, they used Christianity as a sort of universal religion that could assimilate everybody else. So if you had certain beliefs, if you came from a pagan type region and you had certain beliefs in sun god, or you believe in the moon in a certain way, or you felt that fertility came through a rabbit and an egg, then there was ways in which you could bring all of that under the umbrella of Christianity and assimilate syncretism into your belief system. So that is why you see today a whole lot of stuff that we sometimes say, but when you look at that, that is hidden stuff. Even some of our Christmas beliefs and stuff, right? And the answer to that is yes, because it really came in that way. It was assimilated, if you will, into that way, right? You also had this belief, if you will. I think the early Christian church didn't have it, but later on that came on because, again, some of the people that were were converted into the church and brought in, and I use converted in quotes. They had this belief that there was immediate life after death, and that you could move your soul and all that kind of stuff. And so the church introduced things like purgatory and that kind of stuff, right? We also started to talk about the sainthood of humans and the elevation of the Mother of Mary, of the Mother of Jesus, Mary, to the position of prayer and worship. And again, yeah, there are very good expositions around this that shows that even in the Nimrod era and in the era of the pagans, they also had a sort of mother image within their religions. And again, this allowed for unison and syncretization, and people could come in and feel a sense of anchoring of what they were believing in before in the church that they came into, right? You also had the introduction of indulgences where the priest could pray for you. You know, Imam, I always, whenever I think about this, I think about Fire Talk, who was part of the Robin Hood gang. You know, Fire Talk was a priest who would offer indulgences. He was a roving fire. He could move from nation and city to city. And he joined Robin Hood and his gang according to the legend, right? So this was really what they were doing was that the priest would go to various areas and he would act as an intercessor between the people and God. And he would basically be paid for his indulgences and they offered penances and that kind of stuff, right? We also had this unification around the first day of the week as a day of worship and rest, which was a substitute for the 7-day Sabbath. So the 7-day Sabbath, which came out of creation and was a rhythmic thing where after 6 days you rested on the 7th. And it was observed by Jesus himself and the early Christian church. They were still going to the synagogue on the Sabbath day. All of that crept into the church during this period, and it was cemented by Constantine because he wanted to be so sure the Christian church gains its prominence that he wanted the civic part of the nation itself, to observe this day. And so he said nobody should work and that kind of stuff, and he passed laws to make the observance of the first day of the week aligned. And it was good for the church because a lot of the people who they were bringing in from the various areas, they too used to observe Sunday as a day of worshiping the sun. So again, they formed an alignment and you formed something. You say, well, okay, this is not too bad. I could give into this because I was worshiping the first day of the week anyway. Transubstantiation is also something that came in, I would think, during that era. And this is the view that the emblems of the communion are actually the actual body and blood of Jesus Christ. That might sound simple, but that Latin phraseology that says that it transforms bread and wine to the actual body and blood of Jesus Christ was not originally within the church, but it came in during this period as well, right? So that is also something I thought we want to establish. Just one thing I want to go back to, if I can. Yeah, if I can. The other thing I wanted to establish is that when the Bishop of Rome gains prominence in national leadership in 538, and he starts to run things, all the Puritans, let me use that word, all the people who wanted to follow what they saw as the original scriptures and the Bible. But the Bible was not readily available. The priests would anyone who could interpret it. Wasn't in different languages and stuff like that came afterwards. So a lot of that come around this period when people started to protest what was going on. So people were persecuted. A lot of Christians were persecuted because they were not following what the church itself wanted. So you had a real dynamic taking place here. You move from a place where the Roman nation was persecuting the Christians to now where the Roman church, with the help of the Roman nation, is persecuting Christians because these Christians don't believe what the Roman church is practicing and preaching. So it's a real interesting dynamic that started to take place here. And that went on for more than 1,000 years until 1798, when eventually the church was basically brought to an end when the French Revolution, General Berthier, actually was the general, who captured the head of the church and placed him in a dungeon. And when that happened, people kind of breathed a sigh of relief and said, wow, we're in a different space altogether. So I come to an end, and I want to say to you today, based on what we have studied, that I go back to that slide we used in the first class. God is sovereign over our lives, because all of that is showing that even though these are long, long periods, and it looked as if, I would imagine the Christians were living through that period. If you live for 3 score and 10, that's 70 years, and you have this going on for thousands of years, you would feel as if there is no hope and things will never end. But we who are looking back now know that the things have ended. And I think it's important when we deal with this period in which we are in, when there seems to be official oppression occurring in the world, people having knees on their necks, etc. I think it's important to remember that God is still sovereign, to have the faith that God is still in control, and that God, if we remain faithful to Him, which is what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did, God will eventually save us. And even if, what I like about studying the early Christian church is that a lot of these martyrs, and there's a book called Fox's Book of Martyrs. If you read that, a lot of these martyrs during the early era of the Christian church, they went to the stake, burning the stake, or to be eaten by animals, singing hymns and praising God. So their faith never dwindled. We talk a lot about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but there are a lot of people like Polycarp and others who during this period of what I could only describe, and others have described as well, as a period of darkness, a dark ages period, they remained faithful to God to the very end and kept Him up. I want to suggest to you, as I close, that this period of consolidation and then modification of the beliefs of Christianity and the persecution that went with it is very, very important to God. And I say that because when we get to Daniel chapter 7, the core of that prophecy in Daniel chapter 7 references this period. And therefore, that's why I thought it's important just to understand this period without the scepter of trying to answer a question in the prophecy. Just accept it for what it is. And like I say, you could go and do some digging yourselves and read Gibbon and read Fox's Book of Martyrs, or read anything on the net about the history of Rome, and anything like that. There's a site called Ancient History, and then the History Channel has some very good documentaries. That's about a little bit long. But if you read those things, you have a good sense of what we presented here today. And you can appreciate the sequence of events going forward. That's my spiel for today. So if there are any questions, I will take them. If not, we will close off and then get ready for Daniel chapter 7 next week. Any questions, anybody? All right. So if there are none, I would say that we pray to close. If you wish, I know I've been promising to do that and I haven't done others yet, but maybe today is a good day to do it. I will, in your invitation for next week's session, those of you who came through Zoom and your email address, I will email you this presentation. So at least you have it to review outside of just the YouTube channel yourself. You can understand what is taking place. Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, that even when there is clear oppression and destruction on this earth, you are still in charge. And you know the end from the beginning because you have a plan. So today, Lord, we pray for faith. Pray for faith to understand. But we pray not for passive faith, dear Lord, where we can make a difference. We ask that we will make a difference and that we will become active enablers so that your work can go on from strength to strength. But we pray, dear Lord, that we'll also study your word so that we understand exactly what you want from us and that we will not follow fables of men. We'll follow thus said the Lord. Thank you for your word. Thank you for your scriptures that you preserve during this period of upheaval in our earth's history. And you have given us a Bible that we can study and understand the truths you have presented. Take us all. We pray that everybody who is being in this class and their families will remain safe and we will remain protected. It's our prayer in Jesus' most holy name. Amen.